I'm John Curran. I'm the president and CEO of the American Registry for Internet Numbers, what's known as ARIN, A-R-I-N. ARIN is the regional internet registry that handles IP address assignments, internet numbers, for approximately half of the Caribbean and many countries in the OECS. The fact of the matter is that ARIN has been in formation for 20 years now, coming up. And what we do is we work to make sure that as the internet continues to grow, internet service providers, businesses, governments can get unique numbers to allow them to connect to the internet, and lets them continue to expand and make the internet everything possible. It's a coordination function. It's not a regulatory function per se. It's about coordination so these providers can keep growing without interfering with each other. If you think about it, the internet is amazing. The most amazing part of the internet is probably something people don't think about, which is it's made our world a lot smaller. People don't appreciate the strength of the internet in bringing them the ability to see how other people live, how they work, how they go about their everyday lives. And that's important because the world is a huge, diverse place. Many people, many governments, many different ways of doing things. And with the internet, it's actually possible for someone to travel the globe. Even if they can't travel, they can see how things are being done elsewhere. It lets us all be global citizens. And I think that no other invention comes close. The telephone, air transport, all wonderful things. But with the internet, you can truly feel someone else and their life. 5 minutes from now, you can go online and do that. And that's a remarkable thing. Reach of the internet is very important. Being able to expand the reach of broadband internet services is a key priority. There's many organizations working on that. The good news is that we're making progress there. What I mean by that is that the combination of being able to not only use the internet over things like coaxial and copper and fiber, but increasingly now, high-speed internet bandwidth is available mobile. The mobile companies have realized that this is a key goal. So a lot of the people you see now use the internet each and every day from their mobile device, even to the point where they don't have internet at home. They don't require it. That development is huge because it's allowed us to keep growing the internet. So I think that as we continue to see high-speed services deployed across the globe, that provides yet another alternative. That's one important development. The other important development is that as governments realize the benefit of moving to electronic services, that it's actually beneficial to them in reducing the paperwork of administering a country, then many governments now are seeing the policy benefit of internet connectivity for their citizens. The good news is the internet has grown remarkably. We now have billions of people online, and that's a great development. The internet has also been predominantly unregulated. There has not been a lot of activities that apply or norms or standards that apply globally, and that's actually helped with its growth. It's possible for us to grow the internet very rapidly. ISPs can connect to other ISPs. There's no permission required to become an ISP in many places. It allows diversity of equipment. You have ISPs who are using wireless gear and people using point-to-point radio links and people using fiber, of course, and copper to the home. But the point is the diversity of the internet, the flexibility, has been in the fact that it's open and unregulated. The downside we're beginning to see as the internet grows more popular, as the internet is becoming part of everyday life, as economies are becoming dependent on the internet, it's important that the internet run consistently. It's not just enough to have connectivity. You need to have connectivity that operates on common standards and common norms. And so to that end, we're now seeing some exploration in areas such as personal privacy. How is your data used online has become a big issue. The European Union recently did regulations, GDPR, to set a standard for EU residents and their privacy. We have other countries looking at the same thing as to how do we protect people's data. So that's going to be a big trend as various parts of the globe and various countries all come up with their standards, and then we try to harmonize those. Because as much as we want responsible internet use and we want responsible norms and standards, we also can't have a business have to cope with 20 different sets of laws. That was never a problem in the physical world. In the physical world, you dealt with whoever walked in your shop, and the law was wherever your shop was located. But on the internet, you might be selling to people in 20 different countries. How many laws do you want to have to accommodate? So we need to, as usual, we need to allow diversity, and then we need to go back and work on harmonization so we end up with simple results for businesses to implement. One of the most remarkable things that we now have happening on the internet is that the whole advent of social media has created a whole nother layer to the internet. It's interesting because when I think internet, I probably think differently than most people. Internet to me is about packets moving, IP packets moving from machine to machine. To my next door neighbor, the internet is the web. It's what I see on websites and what my web browser sees. Well, now we have a whole generation for whom the internet is social media. It literally is the Facebook and the other online social platforms that they're using each and every day. And so to that end, you end up with a different set of capabilities. You end up with very close personal connections. You end up with platforms like Twitter and Facebook bring people together no matter where they are in the world. That's great, but just like the fact that they're not the internet per se, and just like the web isn't the internet is the packets, the communication, these are applications. We now have to deal with a whole set of issues with these applications. So these applications provide huge benefit, but they have their own rules. So how do they treat your data? How do you have access to it? What happens if you want to say something and you can't use one of the platforms because you've been banned? So we now need to decide for ourselves, is the web the internet? Or is a social media platform the internet? And if so, what rules are applicable? That's going to take time to sort out. Trying to figure out, in terms of development, the best opportunities we have is that these new platforms, these new social media networks, provide connectivity that we don't see in the web and we don't see in email. And for that, it's a huge opportunity. The downside, of course, is now figuring out if someone lives in a world that's composed entirely of social media, how many of the real world rules do we need to bring with them? So we have an interesting challenge. Say something and you can't use one of the platforms because you've been banned. So we now need to decide for ourselves, is the web the internet? Or is a social media platform the internet? And if so, what rules are applicable? That's going to take time to sort out. Trying to figure out, in terms of development, the best opportunities we have is that these new platforms, these new social media networks, provide connectivity that we don't see in the web and we don't see in email. And for that, it's a huge opportunity. The downside, of course, is now figuring out if someone lives in a world that's composed entirely of social media, how many of the real world rules do we need to bring with them? So we have an interesting challenge. So the most important thing to remember is that everyone has a role. And so when people think about rights like freedom of speech, that's a role that you should have the freedom to speak in general and have that ability to communicate with others. But at the same time, governments serve an important role. Sometimes someone's speech can be hurtful to someone. Someone's speech can be defamatory. And it's traditionally fallen to government to be the one with the role to say when that line is crossed through laws and regulation and courts. And so people don't think about it, but your right to privacy, your right to not be spoken poorly of online, those are your rights too. But they're not rights that are enforced by communication systems. They're rights that are enforced by governments having regulations. Very hard balance. We also have the challenge, of course, that some governments have rights that aren't personal. They have national security or they wish to prevent unrest. And they'll produce rules that are of benefit strictly to the government. So there's 180 or so major governments out there. They all have different views on these matters, and yet now their citizens are talking to each other each day. it'll be a while to sort this out. I think that it's important to remember that it can't be sorted out by governments alone. They don't know what the norms are of all the people who use the internet. Yet it's also an issue that governments have a seat at the table, because ultimately any rules that are promulgated need to be enforced with government to be effective. And so we've had lots of discussions in these areas. There's forums like the Internet Governance Forum where all parties get together, civil society, technical, government, business, and talk about these issues. What we haven't seen yet is many practical sets of rules, and we'll see those coming in the. Why don't we have a set of rules which protect our citizens, both protect their right to speech, but also protect their rights from harm?